The quiet at that restaurant table later would mean more to me than I knew then. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Thomas Hale. I was 62 when I finally learned that some people will never respect you unless you force them to see you clearly. I thought age had taught me how to read people. Turns out I was wrong. It took almost 4 years of marriage to my wife Linda and one long evening with her family to open my eyes. It started softly the way these things usually do, small remarks that could be brushed off if you wanted to keep the peace. Linda and I met at a charity event in Denver. I was there because the cause mattered to me. She was there because her family believed in being seen at the right places. That difference should have told me something, but I ignored it. When people asked what I did, I told them I was a safety advisor, which was true. I advised companies on workplace safety. I did not add that I owned the firm, that we worked with oil fields, power plants, and mining sites across 3 states, that my company wrote safety plans used by tens of thousands of workers. My father raised me to believe that money did not need to shout. He built the company from nothing in the late 70s. By the time I took over, we had a dozen employees. Now we had more than 200. But I still drove an old pickup, still grabbed my coffee from the same place every morning, still introduced myself the same way. Linda hated that. I did not see it at first. The first dinner with her parents should have warned me. We had been married less than a year. Her parents, George and Marianne, lived in a wealthy part of Denver where every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Her father made his money in real estate. Respectable money, but he wore it loudly. That night he asked me about work. So Thomas, what exactly do you do? I told him workplace safety, mostly energy sites, some mining. I watched his interest fade into polite boredom. Well, someone has to keep the workers safe, he said. Linda jumped in too quickly, saying I worked very hard. The way she said it felt like an apology. I could have told them about the contracts I had just signed or the executives who flew in to meet me. But I stayed quiet. Wealth whispers, my father used to say. Marianne changed the subject to their upcoming trip overseas. But I caught the look between her and Linda. It was quick, but it was pity. They felt sorry for her. The real shift came when Linda's younger sister, Emily, started dating a man named Jason. Jason worked in finance, wore expensive suits, talked loudly about money and success. He was younger than me and carried himself like nothing bad had ever happened to him. From the first meeting it was clear dinners were his stage. He joked about my work, asking if I checked helmets all day. Everyone laughed politely. Linda stared at her plate. Over time the jokes turned into suggestions. Comments about whether I could support Linda properly. Offers from her parents to help if we needed it. I paid for everything, our house, our trips, our dinners, but because I did not talk about it they assumed I was barely getting by. Linda never corrected them. That silence hurt more than the jokes. When I tried to talk to her she told me I was too sensitive, that her family meant well. I lay awake many nights wondering why I stayed. I told myself it was love, that the woman I married was still there somewhere. Then came the anniversary dinner for her parents at a fancy downtown restaurant. Jason was there, of course, bragging about an expensive ring he planned to buy Emily. Linda smiled tightly when her mother called our wedding small and simple. Jason leaned back and asked again what I really did all day. Laughter followed. He asked how big my business was. I said modest. He nodded like a teacher indulging a student. Someone has to do the groundwork, he said. Then he suggested maybe I should sell my business before retirement so Linda would be secure. The table went quiet. Linda gripped my arm, not in support but as a warning not to react. Something inside me finally shifted. I realized in that moment that my wife was embarrassed by me. Not just then but always. Embarrassed that I did not look successful the way her family valued. I stood up, said I needed air, and walked out into the cold night. My phone buzzed with messages telling me I was embarrassing her, not asking if I was okay. That walk changed everything, because for the first time I saw the truth clearly, and once you see it you cannot unsee it. I drove home that night through empty streets thinking about every dinner, every comment, every moment I had ignored. Linda did not come home that night or the next. When she finally showed up she was not alone. She had Emily with her and boxes in her hands. We need space, she said without looking at me. Space was a clean word for walking away. I asked her to sit down to talk but she said there was nothing to talk about. She said I embarrassed her family, that I could not sit quietly for one evening. I told her her family had been cutting me down for years and she said that was normal family behavior, and if I could not handle it that was my issue. That word normal hit harder than any insult. She packed clothes, shoes, things I had bought, and walked out of the house I paid for. I stood there listening to the door close, realizing I had been alone in that marriage for a long time. 6 weeks later the divorce papers came. She wanted the house, she wanted support, she wanted half of what she believed I owned. Her lawyer thought my total assets were around a few $100,000. I remember sitting at my kitchen table almost laughing at that number. I called my lawyer Mark, who had worked with me for years. He warned me that once this went forward my real finances would be exposed. He asked if I was prepared for Linda to find out the truth. I thought about every time she stayed silent when her family belittled me, and I said yes, I was ready. The divorce dragged on for months until discovery, when her lawyer finally saw the real numbers. My company was worth more than they imagined. Revenue in the tens of millions, net worth solid and clean. The tone changed overnight. Suddenly there were meetings, offers, quiet attempts to negotiate. But the rules were clear. The house was mine, bought before marriage. The business was mine, built long before her. She left with what she brought and nothing more. I heard later she told people I hid money, that I lied, that I was cruel. Maybe I was, but I no longer cared. I went back to work harder than ever, expanded into new regions, hired more people, built what my father started into something stronger. Time passed quietly. Then one day my brother called asking me to join him for dinner in Seattle. He had a client meeting and did not want to go alone. I had flown in that morning for work and agreed. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place where power gathered. When we sat down I noticed a familiar group across the room: George, Marianne, Emily, and Jason, all dressed sharp, laughing loudly. My brother asked if I wanted to leave, but I said no. We stayed. His client was a mining executive talking about safety concerns at his sites. My brother gestured toward me and said I might know someone who could help. For once I did not keep things vague. I said I owned a safety consulting firm and gave the company name. The client recognized it immediately, praised our work, and asked to meet. Hands were shaken, cards exchanged, plans made. I felt eyes on me from across the room. Emily whispered to Jason, who stiffened. Later Marianne approached our table, smiling too carefully, asking how I was doing. I said I was well, busy with work. She glanced at the wine at our table, recalculating. Jason came by next, trying to act casual, offering sympathy about the divorce. I nodded politely and let him go. My brother and the client asked questions, and I told them enough of the story to explain the tension. The client laughed, saying some people only respect numbers. Then I stood and walked over to their table. I apologized for leaving that dinner years ago, said I should have handled it better. They were confused. Then I calmly mentioned the business was doing well, mentioned the revenue numbers without pride, just facts. The color drained from Jason's face. George stared at me like seeing a stranger. I wished them a good evening and returned to my table. The silence behind me was heavy and complete. When we left, Marianne tried to stop me, saying they never knew the scope of my work. I told her that was the point, that nothing about me had changed except what they knew. I walked out into the night feeling lighter than I had in years. Later that night my phone rang. It was Linda, her voice shaking, saying her mother had called, saying I was wealthy, asking why I never told her. I told her I had tried and she never listened. I told her we were done, and for the first time since that charity event years ago I felt free. The next morning I woke up in my hotel room, still feeling that calm, steady kind of relief. Not joy exactly, just a feeling like a weight had slid off my shoulders. My brother texted saying the client wanted to move fast and asked if I could meet his operations team while I was still in town. I said yes, because work has always been the one place where things make sense. People show up, you do the job, you keep folks safe, you go home. Simple rules. That afternoon I sat in a glass conference room, looking over site maps and incident reports, talking through training schedules and equipment checks. The mining team was sharp. They asked direct questions and listened to the answers. The kind of respect that comes from watching someone know their work. When we finished, the operations lead shook my hand and said, "We have been trying to get you for months. We just did not think we could afford you." I smiled and told him we would build something that fit their needs and their budget. After that meeting I went back to my room and saw my phone had missed calls from unknown numbers. I knew it was Linda trying again. I did not feel anger about it, which surprised me. 2 years earlier I would have felt my stomach knot. Now it just felt like noise from a life that was already over. Still, I knew this was not finished, because when money and pride get mixed, people start telling stories to protect themselves. And Linda had always cared about how things looked. That evening my brother and I grabbed a simple dinner at a place near the water, nothing fancy. He asked how I really felt about seeing them. I told him it felt like looking at an old photo where you remember the day but you do not miss it. He laughed and said you were polite but you made your point. I said I did not go there to hurt them, I went there to stop carrying the shame they handed me. Then my phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from Linda. She wrote that we needed to talk like adults, that she deserved an explanation. She wrote that keeping secrets like that was cruel. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I wrote back a few lines. I wrote that I never hid money from her. I wrote that I hid my pride because I thought that was the decent way to live. I wrote that she never asked because she never cared enough to know. I wrote that she stayed quiet while her family treated me like a joke and that silence told me everything. I wrote that she called me embarrassing and that word ended the marriage more than any court paper ever did. Then I turned my phone off again. My brother watched me and said, "You do not owe her anything anymore." I said, "I know, but sometimes you still have to say the truth out loud so you can stop repeating it inside your head." The next day I flew back to Denver and went straight to my office. It was busy as always, phones ringing, hard hats on desks, supervisors moving through hallways. People counting on decisions I make. I walked through the training bay and watched a group of new hires run a drill. The instructor was tough but fair. He reminded them that one shortcut can ruin a life. I stood there thinking about Linda and her family, and how they lived by shortcuts too. They looked at an old truck and a quiet man and decided the story without asking questions. That week the mining company sent the first contract draft, and it was bigger than anything I had expected from that trip. My team was excited. My operations director said this could open the door for 3 more sites. I nodded and said good, because expansion is nice, but the real win is fewer injuries, fewer families getting that late-night phone call. Later that Friday my assistant said there was a woman on the phone asking for me by my full name. I already knew. I took the call and Linda came through sounding controlled but shaky. She said her parents told her everything. She said she had not slept. She said she felt sick thinking about what she lost. She said it was not about money, it was about trust. I listened, then I said calmly, "If it was not about money you would have defended me when they mocked my work." She said she did not realize. I said, "You did realize because you squeezed my arm to stop me from speaking." She went quiet. Then she asked if we could meet just once, coffee somewhere quiet. I said no. She asked why, and I said because the only reason you want to meet now is that you finally see a number you respect, and I do not want to be loved like that. She started to cry and said she loved me. I said, "I believe you loved the idea of me when it felt safe. But you did not love me enough to stand beside me when it cost you something." She said I was being cold. I said, "I am being honest." She said she made a mistake. I said, "Yes, and you made it for almost 4 years." Then I told her I wished her well and I ended the call. I sat at my desk for a long time afterward, not feeling proud, not feeling mean, just feeling finished. Like a door that finally clicked shut and stayed shut. And for the first time in a long time I was not waiting for someone to approve of me before I could breathe. Weeks passed after that call and life settled into a new rhythm that felt steady and honest. Work filled my days, but it did not consume me the way it once had. I started leaving the office earlier some evenings, cooking real meals again, sitting on the porch with a drink, watching the neighborhood wind down. Friends I had not seen much during the marriage started reaching out again, asking how I was doing and meaning it. One night an old colleague named Ben invited me out for burgers and beer, and halfway through the meal he said something that stuck with me. He said, "You look lighter, like you finally stopped carrying someone else's expectations." I laughed, but he was right. I had spent years trying to be small enough to fit into someone else's picture of what success should look like. Not because they asked me to, but because I thought staying quiet was the right thing to do. One afternoon my operations director came into my office and asked if I would speak at a regional safety conference. Normally I would have sent someone else, but this time I said yes. When I stood on that stage a month later talking about real-world safety failures and how pride and shortcuts cause accidents, I realized I was also talking about my own life, about how ignoring warning signs never ends well. After the talk, a young man approached me and said he had just started his own consulting business and asked how I handled people who underestimated me. I told him something I wish I had learned earlier. I told him that humility does not mean silence, and that letting people misunderstand you is not the same as being kind. Around that time I heard through mutual friends that Linda was struggling. She had moved back in with her parents, and was working part-time while trying to rebuild her sense of direction. Some people told me she regretted everything that she felt her family pushed her into seeing the world one way. I did not feel happy about that, and I did not feel guilty either. It simply was. One evening I ran into Emily at a grocery store. She looked surprised, then uncomfortable, then oddly relieved. She said hello and asked how I was. I said I was good and meant it. She hesitated, then said Jason and I broke up. I nodded and said I was sorry to hear that. She looked at me and said quietly, you did not deserve how we treated you. That mattered more than I expected, not because I needed it but because it closed something. I thanked her and wished her well. After she walked away, I stood there thinking about how long it took for honesty to show up and how often it comes too late. That night I sat at home and thought about my father and the lessons he gave me. About how real wealth whispers, but also how respect sometimes needs a clear voice. I realized the real mistake was not being modest, it was confusing modesty with disappearing. I had let people decide my worth because I did not want to seem proud. But pride and self-respect are not the same thing. As summer rolled in, my company signed 2 more major contracts, and I promoted a manager who had been with me since the early days. At the celebration lunch, he raised a glass and thanked me for always backing my people publicly even when mistakes happened privately. That hit me hard because I had not done that for myself in my marriage. Later that night I received one last message from Linda asking if there was any chance of starting over as friends. I sat with that message for a long time, then wrote back that I hoped she found peace, but I could not go backward to make someone comfortable with who I was. I wished her well and meant it. When I put the phone down, I felt no pull, no anger, just clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop explaining yourself. And I knew that whatever came next would be built on truth instead of silence. By the time fall arrived, I had stopped thinking about the restaurant in Seattle or the look on their faces when the truth landed, not because it did not matter anymore but because its job was done. It showed me what I needed to see and then it let me move on. My days were full in a good way: meetings, site visits, long talks with managers who cared about doing things right. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in a window and notice I stood straighter now, not because I had more money than before, but because I was no longer shrinking myself to make anyone else comfortable. One afternoon I drove out to a job site just outside the city and watched crews run drills I had helped design years earlier. A young supervisor thanked me and said these rules saved a man's life last winter. Hearing that reminded me why I started all of this in the first place. Not for numbers, not for titles, but to build something solid and useful. Later that evening I sat alone in my house, the same house that once felt like a place I did not fully belong. Now it felt like mine again, not because someone left but because I finally claimed my own space in it. I thought about Linda and her family and how easy it is for people to confuse confidence with noise and humility with weakness. I thought about how many times I had stayed quiet thinking it made me decent when all it really did was teach people how to treat me. The truth is, silence is only strength when it is chosen, not when it is forced by fear of being judged. I learned that respect does not come from explaining yourself endlessly or proving your worth to people who already decided you were less. It comes from knowing who you are and being willing to stand there even if others are uncomfortable with it. I did not win anything that night at the restaurant, not really. I did not need to. What I gained was clarity, and that is worth more than approval. Some people only see value when it has a price tag attached, and that is their limitation. Not mine. If there is one thing I know now, it is this: never let someone else write your story just because you are afraid of sounding proud. Dignity does not require permission and self-respect does not need an audience. I spent years whispering my worth, hoping love would hear it. Now I speak only when it matters, and I choose carefully who gets to listen.